Welcome, adventurers, to the Recall to Adventure podcast, where we're celebrating 25 years of Islands of Adventure. We'll be sitting down with some of the original show producers, animators, engineers, and designers for Universal Orlando Resort's Second Gate. We are your hosts, Holly
and Maya.
And now, for this episode, we're joined by Phil Bloom, who is the show set supervisor for The Amazing Adventures of Spider-Man. Thank you so much for joining us.
Nice to be here.
One of the questions that we always like to ask as we get started here is really just about you and how you got started in the theme park industry.
Well, if you ask this question to all the people there's always really weird stories and stuff. Back in my day, there was no schools for it or anything, and I hadn't even considered it. I went to college in Southern California. I grew up in Southern California, going to Disneyland all the time. I studied architecture in Southern California. And while I was at architecture school, I took a lot of theater stuff. I was into theater and architecture. And as it happened, as I started my career, you start a job and you start a different job and you get a different job and a different job. And I was bouncing around from jobs, different architecture jobs. And I stumbled upon a guy that was working on a movie, and I went down to meet the people, and they were really busy. So they hired me as a set designer, and that was really interesting. I never thought I'd be I thought I'd be an architect, and then theater was a sort of a hobby. And as it happened, I got a job as a set designer. Then I got another job on a different movie. It's a really tough racket. Movies are a tough racket, and it really wasn't exactly what I wanted. But talking to all the guys and the people in the movie sets and the movie stuff is. Somebody said, well, you should go look at Imagineering. And I said, what's that? And they go, well, that's where they designed Disneyland. Oh, that sounds pretty interesting. It sort of matches theater and architecture together. So I went down Imagineering and eventually got a job there. And part of getting a job is, I don't know anything about it, but I had skills that were applicable. I could draw really well. I knew architecture, how to get stuff together. I knew sets, so it fit in. And then once you're in a place like Imagineering, at least back then, it was wide open to opportunities and then trying different things, and eventually got onto a bunch of rides and then learned how rides worked and got more and more good at laying out sets and creating movement through space, vehicles moving through space. And that's sort of how, in a roundabout way, that makes sense. That's sort of how I got into the business.
Film is really the gateway drug to theme park design.
Well, back in our day, there was film schools, people went to film schools, but people didn't know about theme parks that much, and there wasn't a big industry. There wasn't Universal Creative wasn't existing back then, and there was a few companies like a Landmark and a SuperTech and some other ones, but it wasn't like the industry is today. Totally different. And back then, so yeah, you started in film, or you started in theater, you started in art school, you started in someplace else, and everybody came from different places to make these theme park rides. That's one of the cool things about the industry.
Yeah, and I think it's really cool that you were able to also find a job that also lets you focus on like the theater, like set design, because a lot of these are like facades, right? Like it's just kind of like fake buildings propped up to mimic the idea of walking down a street or walking down a scenario. But there's also probably a lot of architecture going into it as well. Like we have forced perspective and things like that.
Yeah, and it's got to be permanent construction. So it's got to stand up and it's got to have everything a regular building has to have, but it's got to suit the purpose of helping craft the story.
Yeah, that's definitely a big thing that I think goes into a lot of theme parks and maybe people don't necessarily always think about, is walking down like various different streets and realizing just like how much like effort had to go into constructing this world that we're walking through.
I also had to make it hurricane proof.
Yeah.
So describe your role as the show set supervisor for the Amazing Adventures of Spider-Man ride and what went into all of that for the attraction.
The whole Islands team was a really interesting build because, like I said, Universal really didn't have much more than a few people on their permanent staff, and they built the Islands team up from scratch, basically. They had a couple of people, some people I knew at Disney that came to Universal and helped them build this team. And they built the team up by, okay, so there's 6 lands. At first they hired one producer and he had all 6 lands. And they hired another producer. So now each producer got 3 lands. And then they hired another one. So now they got 3 producers and they each got 2 lands. And then they built it up like that. And a lot of roles happened where it was a small team that just kept building and you would take work and hand it off. I was hired to do a couple of things. One was to set up the whole show set design group for the park, but also not really a manager type, but we set up a system for show set design for the whole park. And I hired all the show set designers and set the show set designers and production designers up. But that was part of the job. The other part of the job was to take on one of the projects myself. So basically I ended up hiring 4 lead show set designers, including myself. That was 5. And we each took a land eventually. And of course, like Scott Trowbridge was the first producer. So eventually he worked all the others out and he stayed on Superhero Island. And then part of the thing about Superhero Island was it was the one place where we were really experimenting with this ride. All the other rides, Jurassic was a neat ride, but it had already been done. The other stuff weren't as experimental. And some of us that had the choices, we stayed to really try to make Spider-Man work. So we stayed on Superhero Island. So that's another thing about this business. The titles don't mean much. You could have 8 guys with the same title, but they completely different jobs. The jobs you form around yourself. I've on a project where we'll have 5 production designers and we all have the same job title, production designers, but we all do completely different things. And so as part of the great thing about the industry too is you craft your job around yourself. When a project creative director or producer is looking, we need an illustrator, we need a set designer, we need a production designer, we need so-and-so for this job. They don't just call up a department and send me over the next art director. It's you got to find the one that's right for that particular job. And so everybody can craft their own. They might have the same title as the next guy, but they have their own style and stuff. And that's sort of what my style as a set designer was, mostly moving vehicles and rides through the scenery and creating the whole layout of the stuff, more so than drawing the actual sets themselves. That was the secondary thing for me. But if you're asking about the role, it sort of had a 2-part role: overall park show set design manager, if you will, and then specifically design of all the stuff on Superhero Island.
Awesome. So you got to work on a bunch of the other attractions on Superhero Island as well then.
Yeah, pretty much. The way Universal works is they do all their facades with, or at the time they did it all with movie art directors. And so there was a whole group of movie art directors that did the facades for all the lands, and then theme park designers did all the attractions within those things. So it was a really neat mix of different cultures coming together to make these lands work.
I think it's cool, and you can definitely see that each land has its own distinct style, so it really does end up working well to have a sense of cohesion, but also a sense of being something completely different. You mentioned that Marvel Superhero Island and Spider-Man was where you're trying to do something different, effectively. That's where like the new thing was. Because we also had, of course, like the Cat in the Hat over in Seuss Landing as well. And that's very much the like stereotypical dark ride. So I guess what kind of inspired Spider-Man to go in this completely different, like brand new direction?
Originally, Spider-Man, when they did the pro forma of the park and they're laying all these things out, Spider-Man was an omnimover, like a Haunted Mansion type omnimover. The idea was to put 3D, like the cars would turn and have 3Ds pop out every now and then, just sort of the ooga booga pop outs as the omnimover went through the show. That was sort of what it started that way. And when they hired Thierry Koo, he really had an idea to completely up it. He had this moving eye point idea, or was squinching is what we called it at Universal, where we thought if we had a big screen and we moved a car across the screen, if we changed the perspective in the media to match what the car was doing, we could get this moving eye point and really pull off a different way of extending the physical sets into a virtual set. So that's when it was like, wow, that's pretty interesting. And then Scott was on board to make it happen. He really fought all the political battles and he really championed the whole thing and really worked not just the design side, but the political side to make it work. Thierry created most of the ways to do this stuff. And once Thierry had that idea, as a small group of us trying to figure out, okay, what does that mean? How does that work? What kind of screen is that? What kind of vehicle is that? And so we had to pretty much create everything out from the ground up. Everything there is to pull off the moving eye point and to pull off being immersed in a big screen. And that really got instigated by Thierry seeing something beyond just your Omnimover sort of funhouse type ride, which is what he started with. And then he turned it into what is now Spider-Man.
That is crazy. I don't think I could even imagine it as an Omnimover type ride. That is so different.
Yeah, it wasn't even supposed to be that experimental. And when you think about how hard it was, we used 70 millimeter projectors with big loop cabinets, meaning that every time a vehicle entered a scene, we had to ramp up these 70 millimeter projectors to project the media. It wasn't today where it's all digital and you can just do stuff. We were having a little car tripping a thing to start the projector up and run it for 18 seconds and then stop it. And then the next car comes in and trips it and it runs again. So there was a lot of just innovation that had to happen. There was a lot of really old school stuff that just old machines, and we're just trying to make them work. This is before digital stuff. So it was a lot of people at Universal Creative didn't want to do it. They thought it wasn't going to work. It was too experimental. And it took a lot from Thierry and Scott to really fight for it and to make it happen.
It paid off for sure. It's still one of the most popular attractions at the resort.
It was a thing where it was really touch and go because we did a mock-up, a really loose mock-up where we had a plywood car that we had movie grips pushing the car into place and following marks on the ground to get it in the right place at the right time. And we had 3D media that was timed, that you were pushing the car in the time to. We had special effects, not really real animated stuff, but we had one of the set designers was moving a ladder, and Scott Trowbridge was firing off a fire extinguisher for the fog, and we were just hand doing a mock-up. But it was really effective, and it really got, I would say more than half of creative wanted to cancel the ride and go back to the Omni Mover or something. But once we did that mock-up, everybody was like, wow, we got to do this ride. And that sort of gave us the freedom to keep pursuing with the thing.
You have a moving vehicle, you have like 3D screens, you have moving set pieces in some cases, you have fog effects, water effects, fire effects that you're all trying to throw into this one ride. It all has to be synced up. That must have been like an insane feat of engineering.
Yeah, and that was 30-year-old technology we're using too. There wasn't any digital stuff. Even digital media creation we used the highest end we could get, and it took a week to get a rendering for an 18-second clip. So if we wanted to see dailies, we'd create the whole full-size screen mock-up and we'd watch a daily and be like, dang, that didn't work. Let's try something else. You couldn't see it for another week because it took that long to generate and then render and then get it printed into 70 millimeter stock and then load to the projectors and then show it in the mock-up. So it was a long process just to see dailies.
Wow.
Yeah, that's
just also thinking about that, because I imagine you had to have had some sort of process while viewing those to like also try to sync up what those would look like with a ride vehicle.
We had the plywood ride vehicles, and we would staple the ride rail to the floor in front of the screen that would be, okay, that's the path the ride vehicle take. But we would take turns, the design team. Some of us would push the car and some of us would ride the car. Then we would switch and the other people would push and the other ride. You got used to being able to walk at the pace the car was supposed to move at. And then you had to rotate. You're pushing the car and rotating the cabin. It's all just manual at that point.
It's just like a real engineering project.
Yeah, it's a really down and dirty mock-ups, and it's you're trying to prove one thing at a time, and you just start knocking off your list and knocking them down and putting them all together. Everything was, you'd take these pieces, like you say, the ladder here and the fog there and everything. We never saw anything together until it was in the field, and one scene at a time was finishing. And then you'd go look at it and go, holy cow, everything came together. And it took a lot of effort to make sure that it all came together. You'd take things from all these 8 different places, and then the first time you see them together is installed in the field.
Yeah, it's insane just thinking about like how much that had to go into that. Like we were talking about like Toon Lagoon stuff and how they had to like completely redo some of the rock work for Popeye's ride because it's like they didn't know until they turned the water on. So same kind of like thing where it's like you don't necessarily know how it's going to work until you actually see it sort of in the final product.
Yeah, water is always trickier with the boats and everything. There's too many variables. And we had a lot of math going for us. We did a lot of simulations, and it just got sort of being a running joke because we'd finally put everything together that we really worked hard to make sure it all was in sync. And then Scott Trowbridge would walk through and go, my God, that lines up. Oh, it's just perfect. We really got lucky that everything lined up. And it's one scene after another. Scott would say how lucky it was that everything lined up. And Thierry and I would just go, yeah, I guess we're just lucky that 8 scenes in a row, everything lined up.
You didn't write it when we did, because it sure didn't for us.
So when it came to creating all of the different scenes, was it all decided up front at first what was going to be in it? Or did you take a more figure it out as we build the thing approach?
The 3D media with the moving eye point had to work. And basically, the big thing was to make the big immersive screens work. We wanted to end with the big immersive screens. And so we have that sequence where 2 immersive screens plus the looking up at the Hydroman screen. That sequence we had to work. So everything was about making a vehicle and a screen work in unison. So everything is dependent on that. So we got the side walls on the vehicle, the shape of the vehicle, the shape of the seating, the height off the floor, everything about the vehicle was designed to fit that screen, particularly that screen shape was a lot of different screen shapes. We have a lot of screen experts that came in, and it's a toroidal shape. It's a really complicated shape. And again, you're talking about 3D. It's the first time somebody's done 3D on a ride like this. The screen is like a vacuum chamber screen. So you stretch this fabric and you make a vacuum chamber. You turn the vacuum on and it sucks the screen into the toroid shape. And the screen has to have this finish on it. This was back before we had more sophisticated 3D stuff. This is polarized stuff. So it needed a certain finish on the screen and that shape on that screen. So everything started with making the vehicle and the big curved screens work in unison. And then everything else was a slave to that. All the other scenes had to live with the car with the sidewalls. And then we had to use that. That's what you always do. You make the thing work that you have to, and then you find opportunities to make what you have to use better for all the other scenes. We wanted to fly in the air with Spider-Man. That's what you wanted to do. So we had to have a device that got you in the air. That led to levitation gun. It's a comic book story. So kidnap the Statue of Liberty, levitation gun, all that stuff. And that levitation gun got us to fly. So we sort of backed into, hey, this is what I want to do. I want to be 3D media. I want to swing around this buildings with Spider-Man. How do I get myself up in the air? You back into the storyline of finding some device that will allow you to get up in the air. And then how do you tell the story? Where do you go? All that stuff evolves from that point. And keep in mind, there was no Marvel movies then. It was just Marvel comic books we were dealing with. And so you go, okay, what are the characters we want to see? What are the settings we want to see? But it started with making the curved screen work, and then how to get up in the curved screen and building that all together.
It's really cool. Yeah, thinking about that last sequence as well with the levitation ray and the scoop is floating above the city and everything. It's really great. Even the scene with Hydra Man, like having all the actual like physical sets of like different buildings surrounding you that like converge into the screen is like pretty neat to see.
Yeah, a lot of that was not knowing what we had with the motion-based car and the 3D media. We mixed it up. We wanted every scene to be different. Every screen, you come in and leave the screen differently each time. They would never do the same configuration of how the car gets into the screen or how it leaves the screen every time. And we tried to mix it all up, the different sizes of the screens. We wanted to create a rhythm, and we didn't want to have anything that's repeatable. Hey, we found one thing, let's just keep doing it over and over again. Because we didn't know if anything would work. So we were trying a lot of different things. And we really thought we needed more physical stuff to go with the 3D.
I'd say, speaking on that, one of my favorite sequences personally is the warehouse scene at the beginning, because you have so much, you're able to see all the crates and all the different warehouse stuff as you go into the first screen. And then you like slide around and eventually you have like the Statue of Liberty head that's like sitting in the warehouse, and that has the levitation ray effect. So like it's a really fun kind of sequence because it feels like you're being actually like chased through this warehouse through like a series of 3 different screens and a couple different effects of the levitation ray. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I like when Stanley almost hits us with a car.
Yeah, that's also right at the beginning. That's right before the warehouse.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. I guess talking also about the levitation ray like effects generally, we have the ones that are in the warehouse, and then we also have the one where the scoop itself is hit by the levitation ray. And so what was the like design process of having to create like a scene where you could see the city like falling below the car?
It's pretty amazing scene because we were trying all kinds of different really complicated mechanical ways of scrolling the sets and doing everything else. And it just turned out that we didn't need to move anything. If we have some static pieces of scenery, just verticals that don't have any lines on them, and then we have projected window mullions between those vertical pieces, and we felt like if we just projected the movement of the vertical pieces, we would get some of that projection blow through on the vertical set pieces, but the whole thing would make you feel like you're moving even though the set was static. And so we didn't need mechanical stuff to make that work. So that's the impetus, is the sidewall scrolling. But we put a real set in front of you that falls into a pit, and then we have the parallax of a screen behind that set that goes with the stuff moving, with the building scrolling to make it feel like you're going up. So it's sort of 3 layers of stuff, but it's pretty effective. And it sort of is, again, the ride has this rhythm to it. And then right at that point is when you're just ready for anything, and that just happens, and it just makes people laugh. It's just a really fun effect. It's really an effective, fun effect.
Were there thoughts of actually maybe putting in like a second floor for the ride, or were you always sticking to 1 floor?
The idea was keep it as simple as possible. And we experimented not knowing what 3D and motion base could do. We had ride that went up and down hills and stuff, and it just turned out that we could simulate any of that. We didn't need to build it, and just having a car go up a slight incline or going down a slight incline just really complicates the whole drive system. You have your extra braking system, extra driving up the hills. So keeping it flat was simplifying something and not making it overly complex just to do a complex thing. So we decided to keep it on a flat floor. Really no reason to go up vertically. We had plenty of land in that park, and we kept the thing flat to get rid of complications.
Keep it as simple as it can be with everything else going on with it.
Yeah, it makes sense.
It's a combination of a bunch of simple effects to make it one complete effect.
What was the decision process behind what would be animated versus what would be actual physical set?
We explored a lot of different types of scenes, and each scene as it developed, we tried to figure out the best way to express that scene and what to put on the screen and what to make physical. If you look at it, the idea is all the screens are set extensions. We build the front end of it, and the rest of it is extended. The very first big 3D scene is there's a couple of buildings that flank a screen, and it looks like you have a big vista to the city. In the Hobgoblin scene, you got a piece of the physical bridge, but the rest of it continues on the screen. The idea was where to put the screen plane that helped you extend the set the best. So it was creating the scenes that where we wanted to go and where we wanted to be, and then figure out where the screen plane needed to be, and then where the character would need to be on that screen plane, and then what else physically to add physical stuff to enhance the 3D.
The bridge scene's another one that I think is really impressive and holds up really well. That one's a lot of fun. The one where Doc Ock is reaching towards you as well, and it's like things are starting to heat up and you can feel the heat around you. That's also really cool.
There's a huge heater right above your head, and it's boiling, and then it's just got dampers that open, so it's not like you heat. It's constantly circulating hot air, and when he puts the flame in your face, the dampers open up and just flood the car with heat. So it's just another simple effect of a dumb heater up there with a damper that coincides programmed with the media.
That's pretty neat. So you mentioned that you experimented with a lot of different scenes. So now I'm curious, are there any scenes that you tried out that maybe didn't work? Things that maybe got cut while working on the attraction?
There's a bunch. There was a time when we had a bunch more scenes, and there's this weird, it's maybe not that weird. It goes through a lot of creative endeavors, writing and movies and stuff like that. Sometimes when you're struggling and the things aren't working, one of the tricks to reboot yourself is to take your favorite scene and just get rid of it. And it almost always works, because typically your favorite scene is something that you're so precious about that you end up screwing up the 3 scenes previous and the 3 scenes after just to set that one scene up to work. And then once you get rid of it, the other 6 scenes that were supporting that one favorite scene of yours, they all magically get cleaned up, and then the whole thing comes together. So Terry and I were talking about this because we were looking at a Spider-Man plan recently, and we could tell you everything about every square inch of that track and where it came and stuff like that. But it was a big deal. I remember some of the turning points were throwing out scenes, and then stuff came together. And that's been a pretty good part of my ride design methodology all along the way, is when you get stuck, get rid of your favorite scene. And it happens quite often. What do the writer guys say? Get rid of your darlings, the ones that are just your favorite things. Just get rid of them, and that your writing flows, your movie flows better. Just get rid of the stuff that you're so precious about.
Yeah, makes sense.
We had a physical hobgoblin that flew over the car because we were doing more physical stuff. We had some more physical sets that we were doing that just weren't working out. But for the most part, it is what it is. And it's hard to think there's anything missing from it.
That's true.
I will say this, there's things like that didn't work. We didn't know how the motion base really would work. And we wanted to, okay, we're down in the sewer, let's get back up to the street, and we're going to bounce up the stairs. And never really felt we got that thing working. That's sort of hard to make that simulator base feel like you're going upstairs. So there's some things that weren't total winners, but in the collective, it's a nice break between the sewer scenes and the street scenes.
I think the car spins so much I can't even process what's happening, and the next thing I know, the door is open.
Yeah, I mean, we use this car spin in a couple of places, and it's kind of like, do you use it more? Do you use it less? It's just find the right balance of spinning to match with the media.
Yeah, I think it works because the Cat in the Hat over the years has lost its spinning for some reason. But yeah, Spider-Man still got it. It's a very fun way to like get from like the warehouse stuff to like the sewers scene into the next thing with Hydro Man. So I guess his inclusion, like, because you talked about like trying to work with the comics and trying to figure out like who would you maybe want to see from the Spider-Man comics. So was it like, oh hey, we really want water effects, so let's include Hydro Man, or was it the other way around?
We started with the Sinister Six because we needed a number of characters, and we wanted to, almost like the Tenderloin Indians type of thing, we wanted to take you through a series of scenes. And part of what we want to do is, where do you want to go? Where do you want to take people in this world? Now, keep in mind, there's no Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's just comic books. And where does Spider-Man fight? He fights in the air. He fights down in the sewers. He fights under bridges. He fights in warehouses. And he fights on the street. So you make all the places. We want to just hit the greatest hits of where he fights. That's part of it. The other part is we wanted characters that were going to look good in 3D. The first time we met with Stan Lee, we were pretty nervous because we had taken a lot of liberties with what the Sinister Six was, and we didn't know how precious he was about that stuff. Because Sandman would have been like Hydro Man, but we wanted to be in a sewer, so that's more water than sand, but he does the same thing Sandman would have done. But Sandman was a more popular character. Hydro Man was not a popular character. He was only in a few books. He wasn't even a big character at all, but a water guy, like a sand guy, but water looked better in the sewer, and we wanted to be in the sewer. So we used him. And Scream, we picked Scream. We didn't really want to use Carnage or Venom. They'd be great in 3D, but they don't really work with the Sinister Six because they're not the team player type guys. But Scream, we also need to have a woman character. We wanted to have that Venom character, so we put that together. And you also notice that we didn't have six.
Five.
That was a budget cut. Back then, one extra character would have been millions of extra dollars for animating and for creating digitally. So we lost Vulture and just had a Sinister Syndicate instead of a Sinister Six. So we only have 5 bad guys in our syndicate. And that's just a budget cutting issue.
Was there a plan around having 6, or did you like?
It was just a typical Sinister Six. That's the typical Spider-Man foe, is Dr. Octopus puts the Sinister Six together. As it turns out, Stan Lee, his thing, once we knew more about him and how he worked, he loved new Spider-Man artists coming in and reinterpreting that stuff. And he liked our Sinister Six, and he liked what we were doing, and really encouraged us to have fun with it rather than try to be precious about it.
That's cool. So I guess how involved or how supportive of the whole Marvel Superhero Island project was he?
Oh, he wasn't involved at all. He just had a few meetings, sort of courtesy meetings. Of course, we all wanted to meet him. We all wanted him to chime in on the stuff, but Marvel was really screwed up at the time. I don't know if the history of Marvel, their business wise was crazy. But for us, it was just, we just wanted to hear from him, not just our ride, but the whole land and the whole way we were approaching everything, just to get his take on it. He didn't have any veto power other than we'd want to work with him if he had any comments.
I think it is the best Marvel theme park land that has been built to this day.
It's hard to live up to a Spider-Man ride. Disney's known Marvel for years, decade now, and they don't have an e-ticket Marvel ride.
Yeah, it's true. I guess the closest thing now is going to be Cosmic Rewind, so it's the closest thing.
That's true. That's a Marvel thing. It's a coaster. It's fun. That's a fun ride.
Even then, with the coaster, it's moving along a track, the actual cars are moving and everything, and it does have projection and digital effects and everything too, but it's definitely not in the same vein as Spider-Man. I do find it interesting that Universal did end up reusing the same idea and the same technology a few years later with Transformers.
Twice now. They did it for Transformers, and then in Beijing, they redid it for Jurassic World, the ride.
So, what was it like trying to translate the art style of the comic books to a real-life location in the real world?
For the land, they pick themes, and of course they have the big comic cutouts and the very comic booky characters and stuff. For our ride, we had the best digital animation we could get at the time, and so we wanted it as real as possible. That it's since been done, it's been redone as a new digital thing, but when it was done, it was actually done digitally, but put on 70mm film. That was the best we could get at the time, and so everything was like, okay, what's the best media we can make? What's the best version of this we can make? And then we matched all our sets to match what we could make digitally. And so we created this sort of look that's not quite real, not quite comic book. That's how the ride got developed. The pre-show sort of had a language where the media in the pre-show was comic booky because that was in a comic book vein. But once you got out on the ride, you're in the real world, which had its own language, which was the physical sets that had to be dumbed down enough or digitized enough to match with the digital media. And a lot of the sets, like the bricks on the set work and stuff, what we did was we had the people that made the movies render our bricks for our sets and stuff. And then we printed those out. We had digital scanned prints made. And so we, instead of painting that, those are canvas prints. So we would more match what's on the screen. And then we hand painted blacklight highlights where we needed to.
That's incredible.
Wow. Yeah, looking at that set work, I would have no idea.
How do you feel about when they redid it versus when you guys did it?
Oh, look, it had to be done. You can't keep running 70mm projectors. I don't like the new levitation scene. They added some images on that levitation scene that don't, it makes it less levitation-y, just the scrolling we had. But for the most part, it's a pretty neat thing what they've done. And they put Stan Lee in there, and it's probably way better because that media we had before, it was the best we could get, but it really wasn't that great. And that media, it might have held up because the ride holds up, but it's better now with the new media.
So do you have any advice for those that are wanting to get into the theme park industry?
It's an interesting business to be in. To me, there's a couple things that are really fun about it. People come from all these different disciplines to make these things. Like when I was in architecture, you're in a room with all architects all day long. When you're in a theme park room, you're in with all kinds of people from all kinds of different walks of life. It's a very collaborative industry. So you have to be very collaborative. You have to work with other people. You have to build on other people's ideas. There's a lot of technology involved, a lot of things that are practical that you can't just be an artist, and you have to make it really physical. And so that's a lot of collaboration. And then it takes a lot of iteration. You got to work over and over and over again to just find things right. So if you have those kind of things, that's going to help. But pretty much any discipline, there's a place for you, whether you just make spreadsheets or you just make artwork or you're civil engineering or whatever you are, there's a place in the industry for you. There's a place on team for you. And so I would just say, get good at what you do. No real reason to be like jack of all trades. Be the expert in what you're doing. And then you build a team around all these experts in what they're doing. And that'll make the teams better. Whatever you like doing, get good at that, work on that piece of it, and then you'll find a way to integrate yourself, use your skills that you have in maybe peripheral industries and adapt them to a theme park attraction.
Collaboration is a very good piece of advice for almost any industry, especially the entertainment industry, where you're gonna have to work with multiple people. So I'm curious, what's some of the stuff that you've worked on after Islands of Adventure?
Basically, it was sort of out of necessity, started a company called American Scenic Design. That I'm mostly a consultant, staff extension. It's basically an entity that allows me to keep doing my work. And my work, I'll start by saying what I'm not. I'm not the creative director, but any creative director, any person with a creative vision, my job is to help them realize that vision. And that's a lot of working through, that's your vision. Let's start with the practical stuff. Let's work through the things and see what we can really get and really mold that thing into something that's buildable and reelable. So that's what my business has been. Now, a lot of that is themed entertainment. And within the theme entertainment, a lot of it's rides. I'm specialty in laying out rides and making rides work. Rides are the most fun to me to work on, the most complicated, the biggest teams, the biggest stuff like that. So there's a lot of attractions, but for a period of time, there wasn't a lot of rides being done. Now, the late 80s and through the 90s was like the golden era of theme park rides. Our tours led to Back to the Future, that led to Indiana Jones. This is like stepping the simulator thing from Star Tours to Back to the Future to Indiana Jones to Spider-Man. And within there, you had Tower of Terror and you had Roger Rabbit. And then sort of the capping on that whole ride era was Winnie the Pooh's Honey Hunt in Tokyo. And then basically 9/11 happened and the whole industry took a step back. And it was a period of time when not a lot of innovation was going on, not a lot of rides were being done. It was sort of like the theme park business sort of slowed down. And it really was when Universal did Harry Potter and they did Forbidden Journey, that really just jump-started a new era of rides and investment. I was lucky enough or be in the right place where Trowbridge and Koo were back at Universal. They were doing Harry Potter. They brought me in to do Forbidden Journey. Then after Forbidden Journey, went on to do Transformers. Then I went over back to Disney and did some projects with them, including Ratatouille, and then Rise of the Resistance for Disney too. Also, a bunch of rides that are going to be in Epic Universe, which is going to open in a couple of years. And then just consulting on all these different things too. Like I would say that those rides I mentioned are ones I was really part of just a core part of the creative team. And there was other ones like Gringotts and Flight of Passage and Navi River Adventure and a bunch of other ones where I really was part of the concept team getting them going, but I wasn't really involved as it went any further than that. A lot of rides, a lot of ride development, working for both Disney, Universal, and a bunch of other stuff, Dubai type stuff and China type stuff and things like that. But the main stuff was the big Disney Universal rides.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. You definitely named a lot of rides there that are pretty awesome. Like Forbidden Journey, the scenic design stuff there is also really cool too.
If given the opportunity, do you think you would be able to bring Spider-Man to the trackless dark ride systems that's going on now?
Each ride system has a nature to it. And the Spider-Man vehicle was designed really ground up, one piece at a time, for exactly what we needed to do, which was to get a vehicle in front of a 3D media with the moving eye point. That's what the Spider-Man vehicle was made for. It doesn't need a trackless thing. If you look at it, Ratatouille is a big 3D immersive attraction with trackless ride. It's got a different nature to it. It's got a more whimsical nature to it. So it works on some levels, but it doesn't work as purely as Spider-Man does, but it really wasn't designed to. But it's a trackless ride that scurries around. Rats are scurrying around tracklessly in front of these big 3D media screens. So I don't think I would change Spider-Man, but I would use trackless stuff in front of 3D media, use trackless stuff in front of regular sets and other media like Rise of Resistance. But trackless rides have limitations. All these rides have limitations. And for Star Wars, it's perfect. Droids running around a Star Destroyer. A rat scurrying around a thing is fun, but there's really no need for it in a Spider-Man type attraction.
And then Forbidden Journey has its whole other thing with the like Kuka arm technology as well, how that also combines with like moving screens and set pieces too. Because I mean, we are talking about Islands of Adventure, and you know, Harry Potter is an island. Might as well bring it up while we're on it.
If you sit there and you continue the simulator string from Star Tours, Back to the Future, Indiana Jones, Spider-Man, it's just another really elaborate simulator. And it's got its limitations too. It's a big, crazy machine that looks like it does a lot of stuff, but it's got a lot of limitations to it. But it's something that really works for Potter, because Potter was such an amazing property. It needed something. You couldn't just put a Spider-Man vehicle on it. You needed something amazing that was worthy of the property. And maybe you could have told a better story with a different vehicle. Maybe you could have told a different Harry Potter story with a different vehicle, but you made Forbidden Journey and it's amazing. And it's just one of a kind thing that suits that Harry Potter property. And Harry Potter deserved its own unique ride system. One thing it does, it puts you closer to the sets than any other vehicle does. And so we try to do that a lot. We put the Whomping Willow right in front of you. We put the dragon right in front of you. You can feel like you almost can touch that dragon's nose. We just put it right in front of you. And that's what that vehicle does really well. But those vehicles are 7 seconds apart. And so you're telling the story in 7-second chunks, trying to add that all up into a story. It's a very difficult vehicle to work with, but that's one of the great things about the work. Every attraction is brand new. Everything's got to be figured out all the time. You're just solving puzzles all the time. And then not only is every attraction new, but how the process to get there, you got to invent that every time. You can't just use the Spider-Man process of mock-ups and stuff to get Forbidden Journey. You got to invent a new way, saying, okay, what are we trying to do? How are we going to get this? How are we going to prove that? How are we going to methodically step through one at a time to solve these problems? That's one of the great things about the business. Everything is brand new. Even the processes each time is brand new.
And yeah, the set work in Forbidden Journey is really great. Like, you talked about the dragon, the whole like bridge sequence is like very cool. The fact that there's like the physical bridge there as you like come out of the video is pretty neat.
If you were to walk through that building though, there's not that many sets. It's just we put them exactly where you see them. But the rest of it's a big, huge building with a lot of empty warehouse space that this thing flies in front of sets with a bunch of open space behind it, and it flies the next piece of set. So it's very strategic in putting the sets in front of that vehicle.
If you had to pick an island that was your favorite that's not Marvel Superhero Island, what would it be and why?
Port of entry is so beautiful. It's such a beautiful shape and feel to set the tone for the whole park is coming into Port of Entry with the tower and then going down the Port of Entry. I love Toon Lagoon and Seuss Landing, but sometimes those big bright colors are a little too much. Lost Continent was interesting. Now it's interesting with Harry Potter, but they all have their own flavor, and together collectively is what makes them great. Jurassic is great. Superheroes got its ups and downs, but yeah, I would just say what's magic about it is not any one land. It's the collection of them that makes it sing, and the way that they feel. You try to make it feel like islands, and you try to make it feel like a path around from one sequence to another. And that's actually what's the magic of the park, I think.
If you could say one thing to the theme park enthusiasts who love your work, what would it be?
What we're creating with these things is complicated. It takes a long time to develop these things and make them work, but they're really fun. That's the idea, is it's really fun. Like Spider-Man, it's a really fun ride. Nothing really makes you laugh like Spider-Man does. It's the best of those things in terms of just pure fun. I would say also that it's not the guest reaction that makes this job satisfying. It's working on it day after day, just working through the process, figuring stuff out, solving these puzzles. When things fall into place, it's just like magic. And so when you have some rides where you're really working and you're really working as a team, and this guy's doing that, and this guy's doing that, and she's doing that, and then we all come our homework, bring it together, and we put it together, and we just build on that stuff every day over the course of years. That's what the magic is, and that's what the fun part is just the day-to-day solving the issues one at a time to make one big collective thing.
Yeah, it makes sense, and it pays off too. So thank you so much for joining us and taking the time out of your day to speak to us about the amazing adventures of Spider-Man.
No, it was my pleasure. Thanks for the invite.
And that brings us to the end of this episode. For our next adventure, we'll be joined by Ben Lovelace. See you there.